Perhaps just very, very briefly, a word about the Insiders Outsiders project, under whose auspices this event's taking place. It's a project that I myself initiated. I'm a London-based art historian, actually some years ago now, believe it or not. It's a nationwide year-long festival celebrating and looking in a more nuanced sort of way at the tremendous contribution made by refugees from Nazi Europe to this country's culture. And then COVID struck, and the obvious thing to do, like so many other people, was to go online. And since then, as you may know, we've been organising an ongoing programme on a diverse array of different topics, but all of them connected with that broad theme. And most recently, I see that Barbara Warnock is invisible, but with us tonight, which is lovely. Barbara, who is the curator of the Wiener Holocaust Library, which many of you will know, in central London, came to me with the proposition that she and I could work together on a series of talks relating to the Fred Cormis exhibition. And maybe, Barbara, at the end, you could say a few words about it by way of a kind of conclusion. Fred Cormis was actually a Prague-born, I've got that right, I hope I've got it right, Prague-born very accomplished sculptor who ends up in this country. And the exhibition is indeed accompanied, goes on till early February, accompanied by a whole series of talks, of which this forms part. And it was indeed when I'll be perfectly frank here, and Roger, I hope you won't take it amiss, that I actually had never heard of Gerda Rubinstein before, much to my embarrassment and shame. I came upon her when I was researching a talk that I actually gave, a live talk, at the Wiener Library, looking at the public sculpture produced by emigres, mostly Jewish emigres, to this country. And much to my delight, I came across her, in the course of my research and sort of following leads about Harlow and the wonderful sculpture trail that is evidently still there to be enjoyed. So I think without further ado, let me just say a few words by way of introduction to Roger Lee. I suspect some of you already know him. He describes himself as a retired ceramicist with an interesting career behind him, but also the founding director, manager of Pond Mill, which is a studio and gallery complex. It looks absolutely wonderful. Again, I have to admit, I've not been. I have every intention of paying Roger a visit come the spring. But in Harlow, was it a flour mill, I think, yes, originally, but perhaps you'll tell us more about that again towards the end. But most importantly, he knew Gerda Rubinstein personally, and she apparently sort of semi-officially appointed him as her so-called agent, but I think it was a much more intimate relationship than that. So it's my great pleasure to hand over to Roger, who has decided that he will indeed talk solo to begin with, and then I will perhaps come back with some questions, and I very much welcome your participation as well in any way that you feel able to, either in the form of a message in the chat box. You probably all know about that, but since we're a small and select group tonight, it would be lovely if you simply just sort of raised a virtual hand, or indeed just started talking if you would like to contribute to the discussion. Lovely. So Roger, I think without further ado, over to you to screen share. We were having a few technical issues, but it seemed to be working, so let's give it a try.
Well, good evening, everybody. Let's hope that my technology works for me today.
Yes, all good.
Is it?
Excellent.
Right.
Yes. So far, so good.
I trust you. Well, it's my great pleasure and privilege to talk about Gerda. Insight and Observation was the title of one of her exhibitions that she's had in our gallery at Pond Mill. Celebrating humanity, it's really what Gerda did so well. From her sculptures, I say here, the girl next door to the iconic architect, and of course that is Sir Frederick Gibberd. Gerda had a love for life. The photograph here of Gerda in our gallery with one of her more extracted pieces. That's one of a pair of dancers. Interestingly, when I had them placed together in her exhibition, I said, have I got them round the right way, Gerda? And she said, it's as much the space in between, Roger, as the pieces themselves, which I thought was amazing. And on the image on the right is Gerda with the client who purchased this edition of a fabulous sculpture called Lucinda. And then the shorter, dark-haired lady is Nicole Leader. And then next to her, the tall gentleman is the client's husband. Gerda on the floor, laughing her head off. We were all having a giggle, God knows about what. And then behind Gerda is Alec Ryman of Ryman and Leader Sculpture Fabricators, who have done a lot of the larger scale works of Gerda's. They also produce most of Elizabeth Frink's work, which I think is interesting. And to witness the mold making, and you'll see later Gerda working with them on a couple of large pieces. But this picture of Gerda laughing her head off, it does show her lust for life and her enthusiasm for humanity. So from the late 1940s in Holland, Gerda worked with clay in a pottery and then in the studio of Wessel Couzijn, then on to study at the Rijks Academie in Holland, which I think is where her career really started to take off, because she was given a grant to then go and study in Paris under Ossip Zadkine, and then returning to Amsterdam, started getting her first public sculpture commissions. That's a picture of Wessel Couzijn, I think. So Gerda's love of life and people and humanity. This is a piece called Boundary Dispute, and she produced about 3 different versions of this. They're small bronzes, about 8 to 10 inches high. And a boundary dispute, it's kids fighting over a fence, just, as I say, humanity acting out. Gerda was very, very active when she came to London. She became one of the founders of Space Limited, which was the GLC initiative to provide studios. She was a member of the Royal British Sculpture Society, spent 10 years at the Royal Academy, and was also a very active member of Surrey Sculpture Society, constantly teaching, constantly sharing, constantly enthusing about sculpture and art and observation. 1965, Gerda was exhibiting in London, in Blackheath, and this is where she met a woman who was called Pat Fox Edwards, and she made educational films for the ministry, and was very active in the arts, and they really struck a lifelong friendship. And it was through Fox Edwards, later to become Lady Pat Gibberd, she introduced Gerda to her boyfriend, Sir Frederick Gibberd, and thus this led to commissions. The picture here depicts an eagle, which she made a brace of for Freddie Gibberd's gateway. And Gerda really didn't want to do this at the time, because of the historic connotations of eagles and the Third Reich and what have you. And she had to be persuaded that the eagle was far more than that, and just because it was stolen by a rather nasty bunch of people at one point. And anyway, go and meet the eagle at London Zoo, which Gerda then did. And of course, the eagle at London Zoo was had a bit of a reputation because it had escaped, I think, at quite close to the time that she went, and recently been recaptured or rehomed. And Gerda took a shine to it, so she completed that commission. And then I think this was her first major public commission for Harlow's public sculpture collection. And of course, as a new town, full of aspiration for a bright new future, this really sort of fitted with Gerda's passion for art, sculpture, and humanity. And here she is working on a unique bronze piece called City. And this towered on quite a high plinth, ultimately, when it was fitted, in Bishopsfield, which was nicknamed the Casbah. But it was an architectural and social experiment which brought coachloads of architects and town planners from all over the world, because it was quite revolutionary. And in the early 70s, I lived in this complex, and it's where my 2 daughters were born. So I really connected with Gerda from an early age, but I didn't meet her until much, much later. This is another commission, a bronze piece. Gerda had an extraordinary technique. I don't know that anybody else actually worked like this. These pieces were made by cutting into refractory bricks. These are the sort of bricks that you would line an electric or a gas kiln with. They're very light and quite cellular in structure, but you can carve into them. And of course, because they're refractory, they're designed to take intense heat. So Gerda would carve in negative the form, fit all these brick pieces together, and then take it to the foundry and have the bronze poured in. So this piece you can see was actually produced upside down, and the pouring rods, if you like, or channels, are the legs that it stands on. But this is called screen. And you can see on the left Gerda's original calculations working out the weight of bronze and costs and things. Costs a little bit more these days. But this is a beautiful thing that celebrates the sort of urban environment. And of course, the very first tower block in England was built in Harlow, and that was called the Lawns. And Gerda, of course, being so close to the master architect of the town, Sir Frederick Gibberd, she had a really good understanding of his vision and the vision of the new town commission, which really was quite remarkable. And within this image here, you'll see representation of various arts and cultural organisations and activities. The Alberni String Quartet was born in Harlow. For one, and of course, one of the first things that was built was the theatre. So Harlow's always been very fortunate to have an active cultural scene. Even in Gerda's 80s, she was still putting, the finishing touches to life-size versions of some of her smaller sculptures. This is Exuberance. I think it's very fitting that she produced this piece. It's a youth kicking the air with joy, and Gerda's enthusiasm for life was equally as exuberant. And this is actually at the studios of Ryman and Leader, where Christopher and Gerda went to put the finishing touches to a commission for a large-scale piece. Gerda's work predominantly is about movement. Again, the lust for life and dance. Dancers were one of her favourite subjects, and acrobats. Young boy playing cricket here. Here's the left-hand images of the finished bronze resin piece in the client's garden, and there's another shot of Gerda. I have a little bit of film. Unfortunately, I didn't put it into this. When Gerda was working on another full-scale piece at Ryman and Leader, which was Makarova, the Russian ballerina. And Gerda had watched a BBC, I think it was, documentary about her. And from that documentary, Gerda produced sketches and then a finished sculpture of Makarova in action. And how she manages to do that, just amazing. Very contemplative pieces, both of these. The one on the right is the young couple. That's called Moonstruck, and that's a small scale bronze resin. There's also a sort of almost life scale version of that as well. And this lovely young woman, just in her sort of contemplative pose, charming piece. The Girl Next Door. This is quite a powerful piece, and I think kind of smacks of the topic of this whole program. It's called Fleeing, and it's a small scale bronze resin unique piece. It stands about 18 inches tall, and I think it was inspired by the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. I won't put that in print. I'm not sure, but I do believe it was. Christopher might nod. Yes, he's nodding. That's Gerda's husband, Christopher Stevens, giving us the nod. So that was inspired by the Russian invasion of Afghanistan, and quite a moving piece. Gerda's the girl next door again. This is Julia, the centerpiece here, which is part of the Harlow sculpture collection and sits in a public space. The nice thing is that all of Harlow's sculptures have guardians, and so that's people that live nearby, keep a watchful eye. This one has actually moved recently, and this is now a bronze resin because the original bronze was disappearing in a wheelie bin, pushed by a couple of young rascals who thought they fancied the cash value of the bronze. So the bronze of Julia is now safely in the Civic Centre, and we've put a bronze resin out into the public domain because it's of no scrap value. That's a sad sign of the times, I'm afraid. But yeah, a beautiful piece, very, very popular in Harlow. There are a couple of the edition which are in private ownership and private collections. The piece to the right is Retrospection. A lovely, lovely little piece that I found buried in the corner of Gerda's studio, covered in dust. And I'd been to the studio several times and hadn't noticed it, was absolutely delighted. Asked Gerda why I'd not seen it before. And well, I don't know, Roger, you're just not observant enough. But she gave me permission to have a mould made because apparently she'd broken the mould when she made the original by accident. And I said, would you like to see the rest of the edition? Because I know an awful lot of people that would love to live with little Retrospection. And she kindly gave permission. So we produced the edition of 8, which all found homes within about a fortnight, I think. But a lovely, lovely piece of work to live with. Here we go again, dancing, movement. This piece, the dancers, the pair of dancers, I mean, that would be a much more appropriate prize for Strictly Come Dancing or something. It's just divine. And I've shown a couple of angles of it here because every aspect of it, you know, as you rotate it, is full of life, vigor, and movement. Extraordinary. And the little bronze dancer in the center there, just amazing. And the balance, it balances beautifully. This is a photograph I took in Gerda's garden of this stretching figure. The center shot is Cirque du Soleil. And this is on Plinth 101 of the Harlow Sculpture Trail, which is in the canal in the mill race at the front of Farndon Mill, Hub of Creativity in Harlow, which is where I spend most of my time. And then we have the acrobats on the right. Again, you know, movement just captured in brilliant form by Gerda, an absolute maestro. Here's the piece I mentioned earlier, which is Makarova. And again, Gerda working on the full-size clay at the Ryman and Leader Studios. I think one of the photographs I've got of this, the Christopher's there with the damp spray to keep the clay damp. It was a gorgeous summer's day. And we were all sort of hopping around in circles, facilitating for Gerda to make her magic marks. It was a very exciting project. We really enjoyed that, Gerda too. But that is a fabulous piece. And there are actually still a couple of editions available of that Makarova. This is the one of the early commissions for Sir Frederick and Lady Pat Gibberd for their garden. Their garden is more like a sculpture park because they created rooms in the garden specifically for specific pieces of sculpture. And this is a sculpture that they commissioned of Gerda, and she's called Lucinda. And I think it was 1979. Am I going to get a nod on that, Christopher? 1979. Well, it was in the 70s anyway that this commission was first carried out. And you see there, the one in the garden is in marble resin, and the one that was commissioned by a private client is in Chiswick in bronze resin. This piece is one of the centerpieces in the Gibberd Garden. I'm going to read what I've said there about it, because this is a very important piece. And it's Mother and Son by Gerda Rubinstein, which I think encapsulates so much that is dear to the life that we know. The hope and aspiration of a young mother for herself and her child, the representation of new life, assuring the continuation of our species, the epitome of youth and beauty, masterfully depicted by the sculptor, the celebration of multiculturalism, depicted by the Afro-Caribbean model Sue. This is such an important work, which has been enjoyed by numerous generations over the decades. It has lived in the Gibberd Garden, whilst it's lived in the Gibberd Garden, and we're now working to preserve it for future generations to enjoy. Originally hollow moulded in bronze-filled fiberglass resin on a mild steel armature, it's not weathered as well as a solid bronze resin cast would do. We've been given permission by Gerda's family to recast the work in solid bronze resin and offer 2 for sale at production cost price in order to achieve a new cast for Harlow. A market price for an edition of this work would normally be £12,750 or more, which would include artist fees and gallery commission. We are allowing 2 of these to be sold at £8,400 each, and only the 2, in order to finance the continued life of this fabulous piece. Got a couple more photographs of it here. This is the, after restoration at the Ryman Leader Studios, this is the original being moulded, and it's a multi-part mould, but it's an amazing process using latex, fiberglass, clay, and all sorts of materials. And here's the cast, the fresh cast now in the Gibberd Garden. You really can't spot the difference apart from the fact there's no cracking or scaling, and it's solid on a stainless steel armature. So this is what 2 lucky organisations somewhere could have. It's just such a brilliant piece. As I say, it's the girl next door, but it's so much more. Lovely piece. This is a shot within our little gallery at Palmerville. This is an old watermill, so low ceilings. I think it was something to do with the Arkwrights at one point. But you can see lots of lovely pieces of Gerda's, most of which are in people's homes. I don't have any of those anymore. The limited edition prints of Gerda's work are still available. But no, all of those are bringing joy to people's lives somewhere. This is One Girl, 3 Times. I hunted Gerda's studio thinking, God, her drawings must be amazing. And I really struggled because I don't think she drew that much, because her hand-eye coordination, her photographic memory, her understanding of the human form, the weight, the muscle tones, the structure of the body, it just second to none. She didn't do that many drawings, and also finding drawings that could be reproduced as limited edition G clays without coffee stains and clay and resin and the general studio damage, because they were a means to an end. She didn't produce drawings for people to sit and admire. They were all part of her thinking and her working process, and onwards and upwards. It was just her passion for making and producing fabulous work that drove Gerda, not the sale of it. I mean, she made it because she wanted to share it. She didn't make it to make money. She made it because it was her passion. Beautiful. Look at the economy of line. Extraordinary. Probably took her 5 minutes. Just wallop. But it says it all, the expression of the movement, the weight, just brilliant. This is Gerda with Sir Frederick Gibberd and a bust that she was commissioned to make of the maestro himself. I don't know if anybody knows about Freddie Gibberd. He was also the architect of Liverpool Cathedral and other notable buildings, as well as the master planner and leader of the Newtown Commission that built Harlow Newtown. This is Gerda's studio. Not huge. This is her second studio. Her first one was in Blackheath and quite large, and she taught. Gerda sort of ran sculpture classes, but she was also the sort of leading light of something a bit like the Bloomsbury group, and she would take all her students off to exhibitions and various adventures, and there was always a picnic. And the photographs in her personal albums depict an enviable lifestyle, all around her passion for the arts. So this is her studio, beautifully organised. God, wish my workshop looked like that. And there's Christopher. This is Bev, one of my fellow trustees. And this is another shot of the studio. And there are those limited editions up there of the drawings. Dogs and children, musicians. They're not a huge studio. I think I'm right in saying Christopher designed it and built it. This is in Surrey, and Gerda spent a lot of time in there producing all these smaller scale pieces. It's our ambition to apply for funding to actually carefully map and dismantle and move this studio and bring it to Pond and Mill in Harlow. Harlow Sculpture Town seems to be the perfect location to house Gerda's studio for posterity. We would build a sculpture studio next to it, so it would be connected to an active working modern day studio, but to have this as an asset for education and future generations, I think is very important. And where else than Harlow Sculpture Town, where so much of Gerda's work lives, both in the public and private domains. It's absolutely stuffed. We borrowed some of this for a major exhibition in the Gibberd Gallery. Gerda's tools, some of Gerda's tools, an apron or two, the wax pot, and the Gibberd Gallery did her proud. So Harlow Sculpture Town produces a booklet and a map. We've way over 100 pieces now in public collections, and a good few of Gerda's, along with Frink, Rodin, Henry Moore, and right in the middle there's what's left of City, because the top half of it was sadly stolen, but there are other pieces of Gerda's in the collection as well. And I don't know, if you download this PowerPoint, you could probably read that, but I have given links later for links to Harlow Sculpture Town, and I think it's a downloadable PDF. But anyway, it's definitely worth a visit, and do come and see me at Pond and Mill. I'll make you a cup of coffee, I promise. Here are some useful links. This is a link to Gerda's little interview. Now, I don't know whether this is going to work. If it doesn't, then Monica will make it work for us afterwards. That's us at Barnum Mill. That's the Rijks Academie in Holland. That's about Harlow Sculpture Town, the Gibberd Garden, where there are several pieces of Gerda's. And that's about Ryman and Leader, if you need a sculpture repaired or cast for yourself. That's me, that's the end. So I'm just going to try this and see whether this actually functions for us. No.
No, if I can just interrupt there, Roger, I think you do have to
it's
embed it.
taking
It's
us to
not quite as
Barnum
simple
Mill.
as that. But I think we
No.
could do that in a minute. I'll access the link. Yeah.
Okay. Don't know if I can close that now. There we go. So that's me. Thank you for listening to my waffling. I'm very, very privileged to have met Gerda and to have worked with her and facilitated exhibitions of her work. I was privileged as an art student at the age of 16 to meet this rather brusque Yorkshireman called Henry Moore, who took me around his collection and had me hugging them. And I think, to meet somebody of that caliber at the age of 16 was, I didn't realize at the time, but I realize now that that was a huge privilege. Perhaps that is one of the contributing factors to being such a huge fan of Gerda Rubinstein, her work and her family. So thank you very, very much. Roger now.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Roger. Could you just stop sharing? I think perhaps we'll leave. I tell you what, let's spotlight you so everybody can see you and possibly me as well, but you're the important one. Yes, what was I going to say? Let's leave the excerpt, the video link until the end, perhaps. Let's see how it goes. We've got, as I said, a small and no doubt select gathering. So if anybody wants to chip in, then please do, just by speaking out or raising a virtual hand if you prefer. But perhaps I can just start the ball rolling. Christopher, it's lovely to see you here. I'm so glad you were able to join us. You've given us a very vivid and affectionate overview of her mature output as a sculptor. Obviously, she came to this country well after the Second World War, when she was already, knowing what she was doing. But I wonder if we could just take a step back in time. And, I think you've said you don't know that much. And Christopher, and if there's anybody else from the family, I don't want to put any pressure on you whatsoever, but given the emphasis of the Insiders Outsiders project on the kind of obstacles, the traumas, the experience of dislocation that so many of the people under scrutiny had to experience and sort of work past in order to achieve what they did achieve. Can we just say a little bit more about her very beginnings? I mean, maybe Roger, you could start, and as I say, if anybody else can contribute more detail, then we'd obviously love to hear it.
Well, Gerda was born in Berlin, but I mean, by the age of 3, she was in Holland. She was christened along with her sister. Her mother was a Christian. So she didn't really know very much about the Jewish faith. The fact that her father was born Jewish, I don't think he was particularly orthodox. So it wasn't really until the Germans occupied Holland that her father was taken and subsequently murdered by the Nazis. But she was so young, it didn't really impact on Gerda in as much as it did her older sister, who was a journalist and quite outspoken. But Gerda grew up, after really, her formative years were after the war, and she wasn't, I mean, obviously she was aware of it, and it was a nasty, nasty memory, hence the issue she had with Freddie Gibberd asking her to produce eagles. And so automatic knee-jerk reaction was, no, I'm not going to do that, because of the connotations. But, apart from that, Gerda was too young to have been, severely affected. Obviously, in later life, when she grew up, she was aware that her father had been taken, but I don't think that her mother really burdened her with too much of that, and she let her learn the history for herself. So Gerda, sort of her formative years were after the war, And you know, when we were back in a period of aspiration and excitement for a brighter new future. And you know, that's, I think, one of the reasons why she connected with Harlow so well, because that was the sort of the whole ethos of the new town, because it was built to house a lot of people that had been bombed out of Eastern London, and you know, that was the new town ethos, wasn't it? So I don't think that, you know, the fact that, you know, apart from the fact that Gerda's surname is Rubinstein, that's kind of about the beginning and the end of the you know, the Jewish relationship. But I think Gerda has always had an empathy with those who have been displaced, though, and you know, suffered prejudice and what have you. I think she was a very empathetic individual.
That's very evident, isn't it? I wonder, Christopher, as I say, no pressure at all, but do you want to just add to that at all? I mean, did, you know, just also just a very straightforward question, did Gerda actually talk about that very early part of her life much or at all? I mean, again, Christopher, you have to unmute yourself.
No,
Can you see the
no, Christopher, I don't. Christopher said that he didn't want to
No, okay. I mean,
be
did she
engaged.
so she, by the sound of it, Roger, she didn't actually talk about it at all or much?
Not really. No,
No.
the odd reference, but no, it
Mm,
wasn't.
mm,
It wasn't an issue that sort of
mm.
really had huge impact on her, because she was so young. I mean,
Yeah.
she was so enthusiastic for everything positive about life, that she would never dwell on things. She'd make the odd little reference like that the reference in the interview, the recording that I sent you, where you know, she talks about the Eagles, and she said then that, you know, she was reticent and you know, really didn't want to go there, and it was the forgotten the name of the eagle that escaped from the zoo, but
Oh, Goldie, I think it was. Wasn't
Goldie,
it?
that's the
Goldie.
one. Yeah. And
Um,
I think you know, the whole romance of the fact that this eagle had escaped and it had its freedom in Regent's Park for a while, and she could kind of relate to that, and she realised that, you know, perhaps, although perfectly justified, her reticence to produce sculptures of an eagle or a pair of eagles was, you know, could be overridden. And I'm so glad she did, because you know, that was kind of the beginning of a really important relationship with
mm.
our town, and we all are enriched by her contribution, her artistic contribution to our environment.
Can't help wondering. I mean, you know, I'm no psychologist, but clearly she was very, very young when, you know, the real horrors occurred. But to lose your father, not to know the whole truth, I'm just wondering whether it actually cut somewhat deeper than she led people to believe. I mean, that wouldn't be, I think, an outrageous assumption. Also, on the question of Jewishness, I mean, as you may or may not know, you know, most of, or many, certainly of the Jews who perished in the Holocaust came from very assimilated families where being Jewish was not really something that was even thought about that much until Hitler, of course, reminded them that they were indeed Jewish or partly Jewish or even just a little bit Jewish. So I'm just wondering, I mean, again, is it just Jessica? Um, Jessica, I think you've just joined us. Hi, hi. I don't want to impose or sort of put any pressure on you at all, but I'm kind of interested, you know, from my standpoint as a art historian, somebody who's very interested in the experience of being a refugee. Let's leave the Jewishness aside. I mean, yes, she was only half Jewish, it's true, but you know, her father was murdered for being Jewish. I wonder, perhaps, you know, as her daughter, have I got that right? Yes. You know, whether you would like to say something about your perception of that, you know, or how, yes, I mean, how she communicated or didn't communicate, because that can be as significant, you know, as you were growing up or indeed in later years.
Well, firstly, I wanted to say a huge thank you to Roger, because he's done such a wonderful,
Absolutely, yeah.
wonderful job of sharing his passion, which, you know, it's so lovely to hear and so hard for one to do if you're, you know, directly related to somebody. So really fabulous, Roger, and all the effort you've put into doing that. So thank you hugely. But I was reflecting when you were looking at the at some of the kiln brick pieces that she did, I think she was much more affected by being left-handed and being forced to write with her right hand than perhaps, you know, some of the religious aspects of her background that she really didn't grow up kind of, not, she didn't grow up denying them, but they, you know, as you can imagine in Amsterdam during the war, it was not something that you know, talked about a great deal. You wanted to fit in and not to be different to other people. But I think being forced to write with your right hand when you're left-handed probably explains how she could do the work in negative. You know, as you said, which is quite extraordinary.
Yes,
she was, you know, able to write one hand correctly and the other hand in mirror, all of it at the same time, which was always a party trick. But no, honestly, it's not something that she denied at all, but it's also not something that losing her father, of course, would have been hugely difficult, and more so for her older sister, who was, you know, 18 months older and would have felt it much more. She was very much a daddy's girl, but Gerda had a twin brother, so they were very tight, and you know, even disappeared as you do into a kind of language of their own. So I genuinely don't think that it played a huge part in her. Did she deny it? I don't know. I'm looking at my father. I don't think she did. But she equally didn't consider herself to be religious in any way. I think that it was the important thing coming out of it, was a feeling of, you know, all religions cause problems, and therefore not something.
Yes, I'm not, Jessica, I'm not actually talking about religion as such. I mean, obviously Jews were the primary target of the Third Reich. I'm talking more about that sense of loss, of upheaval, of dislocation, you know, which are much, you know, not specifically Jewish, but obviously in context were because she was partly Jewish. But I wonder, I mean, I'm thinking actually, if I can be very personal, my own mother came as a child, young teenager refugee to this country. She never saw herself as a refugee, and she became a very fine photographer. And I can see certain parallels that actually, you know, you go through difficult times and your lust for life, as Roger put it, actually becomes all the greater precisely because of that. So you could argue, I think, that, you know,
yes,
unconsciously, you know, absolutely, this sort of sense of profound humanity, of energy, of dynamism that you see in her work. And also her wish to communicate to a very wide, I mean, obviously going back to the Harlow context, this was art for the people, wasn't it? In a very you know, profound sense, that this was not highbrow or obscure or, you know, sort of abstract art beyond most people's comprehension. This was art that should speak to a wide section of the population. So I think these are all things that perhaps you might construe. They're not, I'm not wanting to oversimplify, but I just wonder if, you know, somewhere deep down there was this sort of sense of needing to be as positive as possible, both in your life, and I think, you know, that comes across in the photographs you showed of her. She was obviously, you know, a wonderfully energetic and life-affirming sort of personality, but actually, of course, in the work itself. And I also wondered if I can just sort of actually go back to this issue of Jewishness, which is much more than just religion. I think many people will understand that. But one thing I hadn't actually realised, Pat Gibberd, previously Fox Edwards, was actually born Spielman, and she was actually born from a Jewish immigrant family in Bristol, I think I'm right, aren't I? And I just wondered if that was of any significance, not in any sort of crude way, but in terms of perhaps some sense of empathy and sympathy and understanding for each other. Do you think that might perhaps have played a part, or again, was it not really discussed?
I don't know. I'm looking
No.
I mean, they were.
No. Pat Gibberd was another phenomenon, because she taught me a lot, actually, in the early days of setting up the mill. I mean, my lifelong enterprise colleague Sally Anderson and I were very busy with our ceramics, but building studios for artists, and setting up policies for, you know, how we manage this and how we facilitate for creative individuals and partnerships. Pat Gibberd was a huge, on her own, supporter of the arts, and she would find and nurture artists and support them and connect them. I mean, she was a very well connected person. She was a very gregarious, and she would adopt people. And I think that she kind of found Gerda and thought, you know, this is an extraordinary talent, and I need to introduce you to this person and that person and connect you for this opportunity and that opportunity. And it wasn't just Gerda she did that for. She did it for every creative individual in whom she saw potential. And you know, what they needed was the right connections to be able to explore that potential to its full. And I think that was Pat Gibberd. And I mean, it may have been, you know, she noticed, oh, there's an exhibition by somebody called Rubinstein. So, you know, I'll go along. That might have been, you know, the name, which is obviously of, you know, Jewish origin, that made her pay attention and go and look at the exhibition, because you follow your kin. And it's a natural thing to do. But I don't think it was any more than that, to be honest, because she would support people from all walks of life if they had talent that she felt should be encouraged and promoted and connected. And Gerda was the same. She taught so many people. And as I say, she was like the sort of mother of a movement. And that, you know, that was very special.
Now, I was struck by her use of the Afro-Caribbean model, for example, the sort of sense of, yes, humanity being shared between, you know, it didn't matter where you came from. I'm sure that was important. Also, I was struck, I mean, you mentioned it, or you showed the small work called Fleeing, and you said it was prompted by the Russian invasion of Afghanistan. And again, I think that sort of sense of a profound empathy and sympathy for everybody in a situation of needing to flee. You know, in a way, you don't have to say more than that, do you? But I think, you know, that surely ties in partly with her own early years. I'm aware that I've been hogging the conversation, as it were. Is there anybody else in the audience who'd like to either ask something or comment at all? If you just unmute yourselves and talk, that would be absolutely fine. No? I mean, one thing, just moving on to something quite different, I'm astonished that she didn't, or as far as you're aware, I mean, there are not many extant drawings. I mean, given the complexity of those poses, capturing bodies in motion, again, uncanny sort of talent to be able to transpose what you see immediately into 3 dimensions.
I mean, there are many sketchbooks and
there are. Okay, sorry, I misunderstood.
Scribbles and construction drawings,
okay.
like the ones for City. I didn't include the pages that were actually adjacent, which were actually Jessica's as a small girl. Robot, I seem to remember.
I think she drew less when it became cheaper to take photos. So
right, fair enough.
You know, when I was a child, there were always she used to, there were always drawings, but she also used to develop her own photographs, and then, you know, it became so much easier, and eventually obviously to take digital pictures too. So I think the drawing became something that she never loved her drawings. I always did, but she never saw in there, or never was as happy with them as she was with her sculpture. So but there were lots of drawings.
No, okay, I misunderstood. Forgive me, but you know, I mean, they're wonderful. The few you showed us, sort of wonderfully fluent and vivid as well. Did they tend to be? I mean, there were things she saw, models obviously she used, but did they often relate directly to a finished sculpture, or not necessarily?
Not those particular drawings, the ones that I found, because as I said, that, you know, there are lots of drawings, lots of sketches, lots of scribbles, lots of fascinating notes. But there were those drawings might well have been her demonstrating to a class, because not very many drawings were you know, devoid of coffee stains or bits of resin or whatever, you know, because they were working sketches. So to find a drawing that was presentable enough to mount and frame, it was a tall order. And I went through many drawers looking for works that, you know, could actually be completed. I mean, there's another one that I didn't show on there, which is a standing nude, but there's a few inches missing off the top of her head, you know, because it wasn't drawn as a drawing to be presented or shown. It was a thought process. And, you know, that was, Gerda was constantly thinking and creating in her mind's eye. One of her lovely sculptures, which unfortunately I didn't put a picture in the show, but was a young girl that she'd sat opposite on a train. She was coming home from school, reading a book, whilst also holding in her fingers a packet of crisps. So she was sitting there, cross-legged, reading a book, eating a packet of crisps on her way home from school. Gerda went back to, and I asked Gerda about this piece, and she told me, she said, well, I went straight home and went into the studio and made it.
Mm.
There weren't any drawings, not even a sketch in a sketchbook anywhere. And that was just a train journey, sitting opposite a girl on her way home from school. And that sums up Gerda beautifully, because, and as I say, you know, the girl next door, well, the iconic architect, it's humanity. And that's what Gerda celebrated.
Lovely. Did she ever exhibit in either Germany or Holland, for that matter?
And Holland frequently, didn't she?
She
No,
did.
damn, yeah.
Yeah, in Holland regularly, and she has work publicly in Holland. I don't think, I'm looking at my dad, I don't think she had any work in Germany. No, don't think so.
And so she went back to Holland. Did you as a family go back to Holland?
Yes, so my uncle, her twin brother, still lives in Amsterdam with his wife and their children, and we would regularly go to Holland, and she would exhibit regularly, and is quite well known in Holland too.
Good, I'm glad to hear it. And I wasn't surprised to hear that she was an enthusiastic teacher, because again, you know, that feels very much part of the person I can imagine her being. Lovely. So any questions, anybody? No? All right, I'm looking at the time. It is nearly 7, isn't it? I'd like Barbara, I don't know, again, no pressure, but, you know, maybe you'd like to sort of make yourself, yes, visible and audible, and say a few words about the rather wonderful exhibition that this was an excuse, if you like, for this event. But may I just end myself by saying that the event has been recorded. It will be uploaded, edited, topped and tailed, as it were, edited and put on the Insiders Outsiders YouTube channel. And for those of you who don't know the Insiders Outsiders project, you might like to take a look, because we have recordings, I haven't even counted them, but, you know, dozens of recordings on many of them with family members. That's partly why I was so keen, Jessica, to rope you in, you know, sort of celebrating and looking in detail at the careers and the achievements and the obstacles faced by artists who were once refugees, or sort of, you know, insiders, outsiders, that sort of interesting dual kind of identity. So do take a look if you like. You can even sign up to the newsletter if you go to the bottom right of any of the pages of the Insiders Outsiders Festival.org website. You can then be kept informed of future events. So lovely. Well, thank you so much, Jessica. Lovely. I'm so glad you could join us, and particularly Roger. And perhaps over to Barbara, who I will now just spotlight so she can say a few words about the Fred Cormis show. There you go.
Hey, thanks, Monica, and thanks to Roger and Jessica. It was really interesting to learn a bit more about Gerda. So yeah, just to say that the Wiener Holocaust Library, based in Russell Square in central London, until the 6th of February, we've got this exhibition, Fred Cormis Sculpting the 20th Century. I put a link in the chat that you can connect to and find more details. And on our website, there's details of opening times and so on. But basically, the opening times are Monday to Friday. There's also details of forthcoming events on the exhibition page. So just really briefly about the library and Cormis. So we're the world's oldest and Britain's largest archive of material on the Nazi era and the Holocaust. Like Gerda, our roots were in Berlin. As an organisation, our founder, Alfred Wiener, was a German Jew who was working in anti-Semitism work and anti-Nazi work in the 20s and early 30s. He also went to Amsterdam in 1933. There he set up an anti-Nazi organisation that is the Wiener Library's direct predecessor organisation. And gathered material about what was happening in Nazi Germany. We came to London in 1939, so we're in effect a kind of refugee organisation. And the current exhibition is based on a collection of photographs and documents we've got relating to the refugee sculptor Fred Cormis, born in Frankfurt to Austrian parents in the late 19th century, and he served in the First World War. He was mainly a sculptor, occasionally a printmaker, and he kind of outed himself quite consciously as Jewish in 1933 in the early months of the Nazi regime, and then also moved to Holland. He moved to The Hague, and then in 1934 came to London and worked as a sculptor in Britain till his death in 1986. And so we borrowed artworks from the British Museum, Imperial War Museum, Leeds Art Gallery, Ben-Uri, other places. We've got a couple of our own artworks, including an amazing woodcut print from a prisoner of war, from the prisoner of war camp that he was held in during World War I. So that's quite something to see, and some powerful sculptural works, including maquettes for a memorial that he did in the 60s to prisoners of war and concentration camp victims. So yeah, it's on till 6th of February, and so do come along if you are able, and it's free. So thanks, Mark, for giving me that chance.
Thank you, Barbara. It's a really interesting show. Perhaps just to sort of just add on to what Barbara was saying about the forthcoming programme, we've got talks by family members, actually. The next one, let me get this in the right order, perhaps it doesn't matter too much. There's an online talk by, actually no, sorry, it's an in-person talk at the Wiener Library by the daughter of a very interesting Yugoslav Jewish-born sculptor called Oskar Neman, who sculpted Freud and Churchill and did many other things besides. And we then also have a talk later in January by Anita Peleg, who's the daughter of somebody who actually went through the worst, actually came out the other end as a Holocaust survivor, called Naomi Blake, wonderful artist who's probably veers more to abstraction than Gerda did, but nevertheless has certain profound humanity in common with her. And then we've also got two online talks, one about Arthur Fleischmann, who actually, very interesting, he was born in Slovakia, come to this country, and also lastly, but not least, by on Charlotte Mayer, who I think was born in Prague, forgive me for getting Cormus's birthplace wrong earlier on, by her daughter, who's actually a very well-known ceramicist, Antonia Salmon. So I'm very much looking forward to that. So much in store on the sculpture front. So good. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. I will send you, Roger, and perhaps you can forward it to Jessica, the link to the recording when it's ready. So you must feel free to circulate it as you wish. Good. Lovely. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and all the very best. Good night.
So much, Monica.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.